This is a TalkStation original podcast.
Hi, I'm Ryan Kelly.
And I'm Lynn Schultz.
On this episode of Senior Moment, we talk to Ridge Care C.O.O. Marc Maready about assisted living in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic.
It all starts right now this week on Senior Moment.
This is the inaugural edition of Senior Moment. Actually, it's a renewal of Senior Moment. We're proud to have this broadcast on our program, but also just to make a quick note on this as we begin the program here, in addition to WTKF 107.1, this program will now be podcast as well. So we have our stalwarts here in the studio, Lin and Ryan, and let me start with you. Ryan?
Certainly. Well, I'm excited that we have Marc Maready here, who is the COO of Ridge Care, our parent company, and he wanted to come down and be part of this rebirth, I guess we could call it, with us coming out of COVID and having this time off from doing the radio show. And there's been a lot that's happened and just lots of things that we've learned, both as a community, as a company, as an industry. So we thought we could start off talking a little bit about what happened after COVID. That might spur some good conversations. So, Marc, why don't you just shoot off and tell us a little bit about, as Ridge Care, what we learned as a company and some of the things that we had to make that adjustment to.
Well, that's a dangerous thing, asking me to shoot off. Because I can. Thanks. It's great to be with y'all. You know, COVID changed so much societally. And those changes filtered down into our industry specifically. And so I can say, having been in the senior living business, we're talking about independent living, assisted living, memory care when we say senior living, that it was the most dynamic time of change, those 2.5 years, really starting, I guess, March of 2020. We knew that there was a virus out there. We knew that there was the potential that it would make it to the United States, and then it started making it to the northwestern part of the United States, and it traveled down. And so we were literally sitting in our conference room going, what do we do? And the information at that point was spotty. And you weren't getting great information at the time. So one of the first things we did is we brought in a friend of mine who happened to be an infectious disease pharmacist. This was March of 2020, and we said, what do we do? Where do we go? And so he came in and gave a presentation, and from there we started developing what we thought were best practice protocols, standard operating procedures to help us deal with this thing when it got to us. And it's funny, looking back 2.5 years later, nothing that we thought was true in March of 2020 really wound up being true. And so it was a time of constant change. And if the people who lived with us and their families were frustrated by how quickly things were changing, I promise you, it was double for us. Every new report, every new study said this is changing, that's changing, this. And so we, for 2.5 years, lived in this furnace of affliction. And I know everybody else did too, but we're trying to figure out, how do we keep people safe? And by the way, how do we keep them safe and not bored out of their minds? Mm-hmm. Because we were locking them down and keeping them in their rooms for a long period of time. And so not only were you dealing with the dangers of the virus, but you were dealing with this even more infectious and disastrous situation of loneliness.
I have to say, and I've said many times, I am so proud of our team and how we did handle it. We embraced the situation. We knew what the families were going through. We knew what a lot of us were dealing with the same thing, what the families, the residents were going through. We just decided to do the best we could. We had Nerf gun fights. We had snowball fights. Ryan sang karaoke for 2 hours. But we just put ourselves in the situation of where the residents were and decided, okay, what can we do? And Marc Maready, the first thing they did was send cell phones to us so our families could talk to their families. Mm-hmm. Of course, a lot of the residents knew nothing about FaceTime, knew nothing about all that. So talk about a learning experience. But they were able to connect with families. We got the Echo Show so they could actually see their family, talk to them. Everything we could to make a bad situation into a good situation.
It was the expectation of, how do we make sure that we are continuously communicating, and how do we develop different forms of communication, and how do we have enough team members to be able to, as Lynn said, regularly do FaceTime calls with each of the family members, because many of our residents actually have their own iPhones. They have their own iPads. They were able to do it on their own. But then we also had many that had no idea, and we were setting it up for them. It was just a matter of trying to make sure that we were communicating regularly with our family members and letting them know that their loved ones were doing really well, and we were making the best of the worst situation that we could, possibly have. When you can't allow somebody to come in and actually give their family member a hug, that was really hard. And our team members, honestly, the physical contact component of it, we were there to give those hugs.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We're have always been so big on hugs every day, all day. So when COVID hit, it was, they needed those hugs even more because they weren't getting them from their families. But it was, kind of turn your head and hug and be safe. And, we still wanted to make sure that we kept our residents safe.
But, not everything that came out of COVID was bad. What's funny is Ryan talked about the need to improve communication. When their loved ones were, for lack of a better term, locked away in senior living, they couldn't come in, they couldn't come out, and so it created this really, this interesting disconnection that was very uncomfortable for a lot of people. So Ryan and his team got really good at communicating. I mean, they were communicating sometimes daily, memos, updates, emails, FaceTime videos, whatever the case may be. And so as we've come out of COVID, people miss that communication. We just finished a round of resident and family member surveys, and I'm thrilled to say that people are thrilled to live in our communities, which is a testament of our teams. But they said basically we don't feel like we're being communicated with enough. They're still hearing from our executive directors and from Lin, but it's not every day. And so they really enjoyed that connectivity, that close connectivity. And so now it's up to us to go back and retool and say, okay, hey, during COVID, they hated a lot of things, but they loved hearing from us. So how can we create a model where they're hearing from us more regularly? And so that's going to be an opportunity for us to more proactively communicate and keep people focused on what's happening. But that was one of the good things that came out. They like hearing from us. They like being in constant contact with us.
Did you learn something about the expectations on the part of the staffs as well as, and I know you have expectations on the part of the residents and their families, but did you learn something about the expectations of the staff?
Yeah, they were just as scared as our residents were. They were reading the same articles. They were hearing the same reports. And so we're asking people at a time when everybody's being told to stay home, shelter in place, isolate yourself from the world. We're asking these people to come in and provide one-on-one direct care. By the way, sometimes to residents who are knowingly ill. And so we call them heroes, and some people may think that term was overused. I think it probably was overused in some industries, but in the healthcare industry, where people were going into skilled nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, and hospitals, it was nothing short of heroic for them to put their lives at risk every day to go in and take care of people who couldn't care for themselves. There were stories of people who would go home and decontaminate in the garage. They'd strip down. They'd mouthwash. They would go through these really onerous protocols to make sure that they were keeping their family safe. So they weren't just putting themselves at risk, but their families too. And in my opinion, that is nothing short of heroic.
Our staff, our team members did such a great job, and we were pivoting. As Mark mentioned, things would change overnight. And it makes me feel that my team is able to handle just about anything that's thrown at it on a moment's notice. It feels like we're the Minutemen of the Revolutionary War, where Paul Revere is going to call and say, "Here come the British," and or, "Here come the regulars," and we're ready. We'll be able to handle and we'll keep our residents safe, and we'll keep them happy, and we'll keep them engaged.
Our team hung in there with us through all the changes, through the daily changes, showed up every day ready to help our residents and make them have a good day. And again, as Mark said, put themselves at risk, but they showed up every day with a smile on their face, a hug, and we're ready to go.
We're doing a senior moment here on the talk station, WTKF, but also I want to remind folks this portion is being podcast as well. I think that's important because what we're hearing from our panel here from Ridge Care and Carteret Landing, Ryan, Lin, and Mark, I think is an important story. So stay tuned for more here on Senior Moment, brought to you by Ridge Care.
Hi, Hi, this is Lynn Schultz at Carteret Landing. We invite you to visit our beautiful assisted living community. Carteret Landing pairs exceptional, compassionate senior care with the stylings of a resort. Our beautifully appointed suites, common areas, and bright and engaging memory care neighborhood can provide you or your loved one with the quality living they deserve. Carteret Landing is in Morehead City, right behind the Friendly Market. Come by and see us today or call for your personal tour at 252-773-0980.
Hi, this is January Brown with Eastern Carolina Council, Area Agency on Aging, and you're listening to Senior Moment.
It's Senior Moment on the Talk Station FM 107.1, but also now being podcast. And the conversation we're having today with the folks from Ridge Care, who are the sponsors of the program, I want to thank them for this, but also for their service to the community writ large, not just to their immediate clients and residents, to their families, but also to the community. And as a matter of fact, I think we're going to get into that conversation here in just a moment. Ryan, Lynn, once more, introduce our core guest.
We have the very special guest of Marc Maready, COO of Ridge Care, our parent company, and he wanted to come down again to help us reboot the show, and be able to talk a little bit about not only just Carteret Landing, but the industry at large as well.
That's an important comment, Lynn.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that Mark is here and has so much to share with us, actually.
Ryan keeps saying I wanted to come down, and I am delighted to be here. But I didn't ask for this wonderful privilege. But it is great to be here.
No, this is an important topic. We talked earlier about the experiences you had. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the lessons learned, if you will. Yeah. And I'm not talking just the lessons learned specifically for Ridge Care and Carteret Landing, but I'm going to say even for the industry at large, writ large, as I like to say. And by the way, talking to me, either a future resident of a facility or somebody who's going to have to sort of incorporate in that program for a family member. Yeah. What's the future for?
So it's interesting. You come out of these really traumatic times a little smarter, a little wiser, perhaps a little more cynical. It's just kind of the nature of human experience. And so I worry a little bit about the next time something like this happens. I think the first thing that we've got to come to terms with is this concept of quarantine and isolation. Locking away a segment of the population who, by the way, have less time statistically than any of the rest of us just is not going to work. Early on in the pandemic, I was asked to testify before a committee in the North Carolina State House about the effects of isolation on seniors. And I just think we threw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit. Now, my opinion may be somewhat controversial. That's okay. We lived it every day for 2.5 years. You cannot focus only on the physical well-being, ignoring the psychosocial well-being, and expect to have good outcomes. In the future, I hope what we've learned is that we quarantine the sick in a way that's logical and smart and safe and humanitarian focused, isolate the vulnerable, but we have to continue to allow people to live despite the impact of a virus. Because what will happen is if we don't, we may prolong life, but we're certainly not enriching it. And so my message early on to the General Assembly and in subsequent meetings with regulators and influential people ever since has been, we cannot just shut off human connection and expect our seniors to make it through a pandemic, either physically or socially. We've got to figure out a way to thread the needle more carefully. And in doing that, I think we are going to have to, we're going to have to look at different policies and protocols. We're going to have to trust the healthcare professionals who run the communities, who run the skilled nursing facilities, the assisted living facilities, the hospitals. We're going to have to give them wireframe outlines and then trust that they're going to do it well, rather than coming up with an edict from Raleigh or from Washington and saying one size must fit all. It doesn't. One size does not fit all. And the outcomes are, I think, far less good than they could have been had we thread that needle more carefully and made sure that we were managing the psychosocial needs as well as the physical needs.
it's something that we had to practice all the time, which is how do we make sure that our team is not only being serious, because anybody coming into this field is going to be serious, but we had to make it fun too, and find ways to make it fun, because they needed a way to deal with the stress. And so Lynn mentioned Nerf gun fights and snowball fights, and those were all things that we were doing with the team members, with the residents, and it was ways to try to make sure that everybody was still having a good time, because so many people were being told, just stay home, don't go to work, you don't want to expose yourself to this. Our residents are dependent on us. We don't have a choice, we have to come to work. And so we really needed to make sure that we were making the best of the situation for both the residents and the team members.
We've learned that the future of senior living revolves around our team. Everyone knows that there are shortages in the labor force right now. It's even more pronounced in coastal communities like Morehead City. If you're going to deliver a resident experience that people expect and deserve, you're going to have great people there to do it. And for so long, and I'm putting us in this category too, we just expected that people would want to work for us. We provide a fair wage and good benefits, and so we thought they're just going to want to come be here. COVID proved that people are not necessarily going to line up at the door to come work for you. If you're not creating an environment that rewards them for great performance, if you're not creating an environment that is absolutely replete with, hey, you're loved, you're cared for, you're appreciated, you're not going to attract top people. And as a result, you're going to have a really difficult time providing, as I said, the experience that residents expect and deserve. What's interesting, Lockwood, is that we're in a situation right now where the expectations of what senior living should provide we've come through the greatest generation, the silent generation. We're now in the boomers. The boomers, as a cohort, have accumulated more wealth than any generations before them. They haven't necessarily saved it, but they're used to experiences. They're used to a first-class lifestyle. We always laugh and say the silent generation and the greatest generation, they were happy to have a bed and 3 square meals a day. The boomers want something entirely different. And so we're grappling with providing what they want at a time when we have fewer resources in terms of human capital than we've ever had before.
Okay, you mentioned the word capital. How about the capacity to expand facilities?
It's a really difficult environment out there right now. So banks, particularly on the backside of the Silicon Valley Bank failure, have really tightened up. Interest rates are high, so even if you can borrow money, it's expensive. But banks aren't lending money right now. And so you've got the silver tsunami coming. You've got 10,000 people turning 65 every day. And I think for the next couple of years, it's going to be tight to get access to capital. So your supply is not expanding, but the demand is. And so we're already seeing it at Carteret Landing. Our beds are full. We're seeing it in our other communities across North Carolina and South Carolina. We're running very high occupancies, and unfortunately, we're having to turn people away who need care. So I don't see that getting any better. I think it's probably going to get a little worse. And so people need to be very careful that they are starting early. If they think there's a need for care, they're starting early because the capacity just isn't there.
How early is early?
Years.
Really?
Come and look, come and see, and make a plan now. As Mark said, we have a wait list. Our wait list is probably 2 months, 3 months. And so planning early, getting on that list I can call someone and say, I've got a bed, and they can say, I'm not ready, but have that call and be able to take it if you need it. But it's something that, as Mark said, it could be 2 years.
And this is we'll have more shows explaining kind of the continuum of care later, but assisted living is just part of the equation. Many people will choose to start off by moving to an independent living, and some of the independent livings have you're looking at over a year of waiting before you might be able to move into an independent living. And so this is an entire process that people should be looking at very early and trying to make decisions and communicate those decisions to their family members as to how they would like their care to proceed.
recognizing that, we were talking a little earlier about the fact, and you actually, I think, used the term flex point. We're in a flex point. What's the future for long-term care in light of the fact you used another term, the silver tsunami?
Yeah. My best answer is stay tuned.
Oh.
We're retooling everything about the way our organizations run. Dining is if we're at an inflection point, dining is a pinch point.
Really?
So, yeah, it's interesting. We never had any concerns, and Ryan and Lin will probably be mad at me for being overly transparent. We never had any concerns about food 2 and 3 years ago. Everyone loved it. COVID kept us out of the dining room. We were having to serve people in their rooms. It was a less refined experience than they were used to because the food had to go down the corridors. It was a little colder. So I think people started to focus on the food, and they haven't stopped. But what's interesting is, and I say this to everybody, if you were to eat, let's say that your grandmother cooks the best food you've ever eaten. That was the case for me. If I ate at my grandmother's house 3 times a day for 2 weeks, I'd be sick of it.
Okay.
So our residents are eating in the same dining room, having meals prepared by the same folks 3 times a day. So they want different things. Now, I will say this. If you could see me, you would know that I'm somewhat of an expert on food. And I enjoy the food in our communities. It's good. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say it's not good 100% of the time. It's not fantastic 100% of the time, but it's good all the time. It's just not fantastic. But the needs and the tastes are changing. Something else. Our communities used to be centered in the western part of the state, around the Piedmont, Winston-Salem. Just north of Winston-Salem is where our company was born. Back then, if you served biscuits and gravy, or fried chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy, everyone was happy every day. But then we started getting folks coming from the Northeast. And guess what? They don't like their beans cooked down all day. They like a little crunch in them. And so we've had to evolve. So we're in that same place right now with food. We've got to figure out how to create a really exceptional restaurant experience, given the limitations of staffing, given the limitations of budgeting, right? Because food's more expensive for everybody. Most people are probably eating less well today than they were a year and a half ago because of what inflation has done. So we're trying to figure out how to make that happen. At the same time, when we hear people who are less enthused about our food, we ask them, have you been to a restaurant lately? Because you know as well as I do, restaurant experiences are very different today than they were 2 years ago. So it's a pinch point for us in that we've got to figure out how to deliver the quality and the consistency that residents want, understanding that there are going to be circumstances surrounding that experience that are probably going to be really challenging. But we're trying to tackle it. Hey, we've got colleagues and competitors in bigger markets who are doing Uber Eats. So, 2 or 3 nights a week, if you're tired of eating what the dining room's producing, then, hey, we'll bring in food from the outside. So I think there's real opportunity here. And again, I don't want to imply that our food is bad. It's good.
Right.
It's just the expectations have changed. The greatest generation would have loved it.
Right. 5
stars across the board. The boomers, they're not quite as excited.
We're talking with Marc Maready, again, of Ridge Care. We have Ryan and Lin here on this inaugural effort of Senior Moment. And Marc, great conversation. And you introduced some things that most of us never even considered. Thank you very much.
Delighted to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Lin, Ryan.
Thank you, Lockwood.
Senior Moment.